Hi, my name is Garth Neufeld, professor of psychology here at Cascadia College, and in this year, 21-22, as of filming this, I am the faculty in residence for the Teaching and Learning Academy. As you begin to teach at Cascadia, we want to draw your attention to some developments in learning science and cognitive psychology that have given us insights as to how students learn and how those learning techniques can be implemented in your courses. There are a lot of resources out there, and you might have already found some, including Stephen Chew's YouTube series on how to get the most out of studying, which is targeted at students, as well as many great books, including Make It Stick and Powerful Teaching. These are all great evidence-based resources that you might want to check out. But this video will focus on the findings of a monograph by John Dunlowski and colleagues that summarizes decades of research on the effectiveness of various learning techniques, taking into account conditions, student characteristics, the materials they used, criterion measurement or assessment type. This study was really thorough. And in the end, they reviewed 10 different learning techniques, and then they ranked them. The highest rated techniques would be those that work for a lot of students in a lot of different situations. As an aside, study techniques that students tend to think most helpful, or those which are most utilized, for example, rereading, highlighting, summarizing. These made the bottom tier of the list of effective learning techniques. That means they don't work well, at least not in the way that the brain works. And they're not great use of student or instructor time, but students and many instructors don't know that as far as learning goes, employing these kinds of techniques is like swimming against the tide. So let's look at the top tier of techniques. There are two techniques that seem to complement the brain's learning preferences, and these are practice testing and distributed practice. Now, these two techniques are really easy to fit into what you're already doing. So if you didn't know if you were doing evidence-based instruction, using these were really helpful to me to know that. The article says that both of these received high utility assessments because they benefit learners of different ages and abilities and have been shown to boost student performance across many criterion tasks and even in educational contexts. That last part might make you scratch your head a little bit. They're talking about educational contexts as opposed to laboratory contexts, where some of these things work and then we bring them into the classroom and they don't work. So, again, these two techniques work well for a lot of students in a variety of situations. So let's look at these two techniques. The first one is practice testing. It's also been called retrieval practice. And it's just that. You test yourself on material at any stage of the learning. It can even be before you learn it, or while you're learning it, or after you learn it. Just the act of trying to remember seems to strengthen memory. And in the past, testing has been synonymous with summative assessment. That is, it was used maybe at the end of a module in a sort of high stakes way to determine a student's grade. This is not exactly what we refer to, although it is a type of practice testing. But ultimately, we are looking towards more of a formative assessment, a way of using practice testing. So how do you do it? You ask students questions. Really simple. Now, there are many publisher test banks out there that will work for this. They're helpful. One thing that we know is that free recall questions like fill in the blank are much better than multiple choice questions for learning. But there are also tech tools out there like Poll Everywhere that you can use in class. But it doesn't even have to be that elaborative. Posing a question in class and asking students to take time to answer it is really effective. So asking students a question like, why is the gravitational pull on the moon weaker than on the Earth? And then giving them a minute to write their answers down will ultimately help them learn the answer, even if they don't know it yet. It's really easy to implement practice testing in class. Just set the time aside to do it. But what about outside of class or online? Well, this is where we need to be a little bit more creative. But it's not too difficult. Low stakes, required multiple choice tests or fill in the blank tests or practice questions will do the job. Again, I would suggest favoring fill in the blank questions over multiple choice. But they will do the job of what practice testing can do for us in learning. Or you could have students do the work, have them develop certain questions that their peers can then answer, and then grade them for completion. You don't need to grade them for accuracy necessarily. Just get students studying in this kind of way, and you can just make them all or none. You did it or you didn't. We're not trying to add any burden to your already heavy workload. Okay, the second technique after practice testing is distributed practice, which sounds to students immediately like a lot of work, but it really isn't. It's about planning and time management skills more than it is about time spent or effort. In short, distributed practice, or it's also called space practice, simply spaces studying over time instead of doing it all at once. It seems the brain prefers this for long-term retention. You see, what's working against us and really against students is the positive reinforcement that some students get from cramming, because cramming can get you a passing grade. It's a little bit effective in the short term, but you see, in the long term, cramming doesn't work. And students might end up spending the same amount of time cramming as they would in distributed practice or spacing it out over maybe the course of a week or something. So if there is a summative midterm or final exam, we won't remember crammed information that we learned earlier. But spacing it out into 30-minute chunks instead of 2 hours at a time, that seems to work. Now, a student who understands or who has the skills of spacing and practice testing in tandem might have their academic lives forever changed. These skills will go with them even beyond the classroom, whether learning a new computer coding language or studying a real estate exam or sitting in a workshop related to a new financial tool to run a small business. Understanding how the brain learns and working with it can give students a more successful future. So let's help them with that. Okay, so how might you do distributed practice in the classroom? If you have just completed Chapter 6, you're maybe in midterm, don't just do practice test questions on Chapter 6. Instead, pull in questions from chapters 1 to 5. So you're already setting time aside in your class to do the practice testing or retrieval practice, right? 5-10 minutes at the end of class, something like that. But pull in questions or problems or content from earlier in the course, and that should really help you. One teacher I know decided to make his tests progressively longer throughout the term. And so maybe the first test had 10 questions on it, but by test 4, because there's more content, there were more questions. So 70 questions. I thought this was a great way of putting this into practice. If you want to discuss how any of these techniques are used or could be used in your particular discipline or your courses, please feel free to contact the Teaching and Learning Academy at tla@cascadia.edu, and we would be happy to chat. You can also contact me personally. I'd love to chat with you about it. One final note about the science of learning, because this video really wouldn't be complete without it. Learning styles are not a thing. That is, matching your teaching and instruction to a student's particular and preferred and supposed learning style or preference does not show any scientific benefit to learning. Well, we are not quite sure how this myth gained so much momentum. It has, and it perpetuates, especially in K-12 education, but also in higher education. This belief is actually fairly dangerous, as studies have shown that it can undermine learning. For more information about the myth of learning styles, please see this article, and there's lots of links in history to the problem, the myth, and what we should do about it. We hope that you'll begin to implement practice testing and distributed practice in your courses here at Cascadia. The science indicates that it will help your students learn, and it will offer them a lifelong skill. Thanks.